I found an old photo in my father's desk drawer on a Tuesday morning in March. The kind of morning where the light comes in slanted and gold, cutting through dust that's been settling for years. I wasn't supposed to be there, wasn't supposed to be going through his things, but grief doesn't follow rules, and neither does memory. The envelope was yellowed at the edges, tucked between insurance papers and receipts from 1987. Written across it in my mother's handwriting, that careful cursive she used for important things, were the words "Ballroom, 1958." Just that, nothing else. I opened it slowly, the way you open things you know might hurt. And there they were. My parents, young, so impossibly young, dancing in what looked like a grand ballroom, all ornate mirrors and chandelier light. My father's hand on my mother's waist, her head tilted back mid-laugh, both of them frozen in a moment of such pure joy that it felt obscene to witness it now, knowing everything that came after. I wasn't looking for them when I found this. I was looking for something else. Closure, maybe. Or just a reason to finally clean out this house that's been sitting empty since they died. But there they were, smiling up at me from 1958, from before I existed, from a version of their lives where I wasn't even a possibility yet. And the strangest thing happened as I stared at that photograph. For just a second, less than a second really, just a flicker, I could have sworn I saw them move. His hand adjusting on her waist, her dress swaying. The smallest suggestion of motion, like the photograph was breathing. I blinked and they were still again, frozen, dead. But something had shifted in me. I carried the photo downstairs to the kitchen, made coffee I didn't drink, and sat with it under the overhead light that buzzes when the refrigerator runs. The house was so quiet. It's been quiet for 2 years now, since the funeral, since the last of the sympathy casseroles stopped arriving, since people stopped checking in to see if I was okay. I wasn't okay, but I'd gotten good at being not okay in private. Looking at them in that photograph, I tried to remember the last time I'd seen them truly happy. Not the performance of happiness they'd put on for holidays or grandchildren's birthdays, but real, unself-conscious joy. The kind captured in this image from 67 years ago. I couldn't remember, and that fact sat in my chest like a stone. My parents weren't unhappy people. That's not fair to say. They loved each other, I think, in the way people who have been married for 53 years love each other, with habit and history and the kind of deep knowledge that doesn't need to be spoken. But there was also silence, long stretches of it, especially toward the end. I grew up in a house where the television was always on because nobody wanted to hear the quiet, where my father read the newspaper at breakfast and my mother did crossword puzzles, and they existed in the same space without really touching. Parallel lines that had somehow forgotten they once intersected. But here, in this photograph from 1958, they were intersecting. Colliding, even. The energy between them was almost visible. The electricity of new love, or young love, or whatever kind of love exists before mortgages and medical bills, and all the small disappointments that accumulate like dust in the corners of a marriage. Who were these people? I realized, sitting there in my father's kitchen, that I didn't know them. Not really. I knew them as my parents, the roles they performed, the ways they moved through the world with me in it. But these two people in the photograph, dancing in a ballroom in 1958, they existed before me. They had entire lives, entire selves that I would never access. My mother was 23 in this photo. 23. I'm 47 now. When I was 23, I was backpacking through Europe, sleeping in hostels, believing I was invincible. What was she doing at 23? Dancing with my father, obviously. But what else? What did she dream about? What scared her? Who did she think she would become? I never asked, and now I never could. The regret of that, the sheer weight of all the questions I never asked, pressed down on me until I had to stand up, move around, do something with my hands. I washed the already clean coffee cup. I straightened the stack of mail on the counter. I opened and closed the refrigerator without taking anything out. And then I went back to the photograph. I picked it up again, held it closer to the light. There was something about my father's face in it, the way he was looking at her, like she was the only person in the room, like she was the only person in the world. I'd never seen him look at anyone that way, not that I could remember. Certainly not in the last 20 years, when his world had narrowed to doctor's appointments and medication schedules and the slow, grinding erosion of his body. He'd been sick for a long time. We all knew it was coming, but knowing doesn't prepare you. Nothing prepares you for the moment your father stops being your father and becomes just a body, just a collection of failing systems, just something you have to watch suffer. I wasn't a good son at the end. I want to be honest about that. I visited, but not enough. I called, but the conversations were brief, stilted. I didn't know what to say to him. Didn't know how to bridge the gap between us that had been growing for years. We'd never been particularly close. He wasn't a bad father, just a distant one. A man who showed love through providing, through fixing things, through being present without really being there. He came to my baseball games but stood apart from the other parents. He paid for my college but never asked what I was studying. He walked me down the aisle at my wedding and shook my hand afterward, firm and businesslike. I used to resent him for that, for his emotional unavailability, for the way he seemed to exist behind glass, visible but untouchable. But looking at him in this photograph, young and laughing and holding my mother like she might float away if he let go, I wondered if maybe I'd been wrong. If maybe the man I knew wasn't the whole man. If maybe there were depths to him I never explored because I was too busy being angry about the surface. My mother died first. Cancer. Fast and brutal. 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. My father was devastated in a way I didn't expect. He didn't cry at the service, but afterward, back at the house, I found him in their bedroom, holding one of her scarves, just holding it, not moving. He lived another 1.5 years after that, but something in him had broken, or maybe it hadn't broken. Maybe it had just stopped trying to hold itself together. He got quieter, smaller. He stopped reading the newspaper, stopped doing the crosswords she'd left unfinished. He just diminished. When he died, I felt relief. I hate admitting that, but it's true. Relief that it was over. Relief that I didn't have to watch him disappear anymore. Relief that I didn't have to keep failing at being the son he needed in those final months. But I didn't feel grief. Not at first. Grief came later in strange moments. When I was sorting through his belongings and found a birthday card I'd made him in 2nd grade, carefully preserved in a drawer. When I was going through his closet and realized all his shirts still smelled like him. When I found this photograph and understood, with sudden and terrible clarity, that I'd never really known him at all. I sat back down at the kitchen table. The coffee was cold now. The light had shifted, coming in at a different angle, making the whole room look unfamiliar. I stared at the photograph until my eyes blurred. And then something happened. It's hard to explain. I'm not a mystical person. I don't believe in ghosts or signs from the universe or any of that. I'm a middle-aged man with a government job and a mortgage and a life that's more or less what I expected it to be. Magic isn't part of my vocabulary. But as I stared at that photograph, as the afternoon light turned everything in the kitchen to gold, the image began to move. Not like before, not just a flicker, really move. The dance was continuing. My father's hand sliding along my mother's back, her dress swaying with the rhythm of music I couldn't hear. Both of them turning, slowly, gracefully, their faces alive with something I could only call happiness. I should have been terrified, or thought I was losing my mind. But I wasn't, and I didn't. Instead, I felt calm, curious, like I was being shown something important. The movement in the photograph spread. The other couples in the background began dancing too. The chandelier light flickered as if real candles were burning in it. Shadows moved across the ballroom floor. And then I heard it, faint at first, barely audible. Music. Big band era, lush and romantic, the kind of music they don't make anymore. It was coming from the photograph, I was sure of it, though that made no sense. I leaned closer. The ballroom in the photograph was expanding somehow, taking up more space than should be possible in a 4:6 image. The edges were growing, spreading beyond the frame, until I wasn't looking at a photograph anymore. I was looking through a window. And then I wasn't looking through anything. I was there. I don't know how else to describe it. One moment I was sitting in my father's kitchen, and the next I was standing in that ballroom, dressed in a suit I didn't own, surrounded by couples in formal wear from another era, all of them dancing, all of them alive in that particular way people are alive when they're young and in love and don't yet know about mortality. The music was everywhere. Live music, I realized, coming from a band on a raised platform at the far end of the room. Trumpet, saxophone, piano, drums, double bass. The musicians were in white dinner jackets, their faces focused and joyful, playing like the music mattered more than anything. And there, in the center of the floor, were my parents. They hadn't seen me yet. They were too absorbed in each other, moving together with the kind of synchronization that comes from bodies that know each other, that trust each other completely. My father was leading, but barely. They moved as one entity, anticipating each other's steps, reading each other's subtle shifts in weight and direction. My mother's dress was midnight blue, fitted at the waist with a full skirt that swirled as she turned. My father wore a black tuxedo with a thin tie, his hair dark and thick, his face unlined. They looked like movie stars. They looked like people I'd never met. I wanted to call out to them, but something stopped me. An instinct that I was witnessing something private, something sacred. So instead, I just watched. They danced through the song, through another, through a third. Around them, the other couples danced too, but I barely noticed them. I couldn't look away from my parents. From the way my mother's hand rested on my father's shoulder. From the way he looked down at her between turns, his expression soft, unguarded. From the way they smiled at each other like they shared a secret the rest of the world couldn't access. This was them. This was who they'd been before they became my parents, before they became the quiet, distant people I'd grown up with. Before life got hard and complicated and wore them down into something smaller than what they'd started as. The song changed, slower now. The bandleader said something I couldn't quite hear, and couples around the floor pulled closer to each other. My father drew my mother in, her head coming to rest against his chest, his arms wrapping around her back. They swayed more than danced now. Barely moving, just holding each other, existing in their own small world within the larger world of the ballroom. And I realized I was crying. Not the polite, silent tears you cry at funerals. Real crying. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and hurts on its way out. Because I was seeing something I'd never understood before. My parents had loved each other. Really loved each other. Not just in the obligatory way married people love each other, but in this profound, consuming way that made everything else secondary. And somewhere along the way, they'd lost it, or buried it, or forgotten how to access it. Life had gotten in the way. I had gotten in the way. The world had gotten in the way. All the small necessities of existence, working, paying bills, raising a child, getting older, getting sick, had piled up between them and this pure thing they'd once had, until they couldn't find their way back to it. But it had existed. It had been real. The song ended. The bandleader thanked the crowd, announced a break. Couples began drifting toward the edges of the ballroom, toward tables laden with punch bowls and finger sandwiches, toward groups of friends and the comfortable small talk of social gatherings. My parents stayed on the floor for a moment longer. My father said something I couldn't hear. My mother laughed, touched his face. Then they too began to move toward the side of the room. And that's when my mother saw me. Her steps faltered. Her smile faded into something more complex, surprise, recognition, something that might have been sadness. She said something to my father, who turned to look where she was pointing. When our eyes met, I saw the same flicker of recognition in his face, but also confusion, like he knew me but couldn't place me, like I was a memory he couldn't quite access. He said something to my mother. She nodded. And then they were walking toward me, hand in hand, weaving through the crowd of dancers. My heart was hammering. I didn't know what to say, what to do. Should I run? Stay? Explain somehow why I was here, in their past, in this moment that belonged to them. But before I could decide, they were standing in front of me. Up close, they looked even younger than they had from across the room. My mother's face was unlined, her eyes bright. My father's shoulders were broader than I remembered, his posture confident, easy. "Hello," my mother said. Her voice was different, lighter, younger, but unmistakably hers. "Hi," I managed. "We haven't met, have we?" my father asked. "I'm David, this is Alina." Their names. Hearing their names spoken casually, as introductions, as if we were strangers meeting at a party, was almost too much. I'd called them Mom and Dad my entire life. I'd never really thought of them as David and Alina, as people with identities separate from their relationship to me. "No," I said, "we haven't met, not like this." Alina tilted her head, studying me. "You seem familiar, though." "Do I?" "Yes, something about your eyes. They remind me of someone." I almost laughed. Of course I reminded her of someone. I had my father's eyes, his hands, his tendency to stand with my weight on one foot. But she didn't know that yet. She wouldn't know that for another 8 years, when I was born and they stopped being David and Alina and became Mom and Dad. "You're a beautiful dancer," I said instead, looking at my father. He smiled, and it transformed his face. I'd forgotten he could smile like that, or maybe I'd never known. "Thank you, but Alina's the real dancer. I just try not to step on her feet." "You're doing better than just that," Alina said, squeezing his hand. They looked at each other, and in that look was everything. All the love, all the promise, all the future they couldn't yet see. They had no idea what was coming. The fights, the silences, the slow erosion of this bright, shining thing between them. The cancer, the grief, the way my father would sit in their bedroom holding her scarf. They didn't know any of it, and I couldn't tell them. "You two should dance every day," I said suddenly. "Don't stop. Don't let anything make you stop." Alina laughed. "That's a lovely thought, though I'm not sure our neighbors would appreciate it." "I'm serious," I said, and my voice came out more intense than I meant it to. "Whatever happens, whatever gets hard or complicated or overwhelming, keep dancing. Keep finding your way back to this. Promise me." They exchanged a glance, concerned now, like I might be drunk or unstable. "Are you all right?" David asked. I wasn't. I was 47 years old, standing in a vision or a dream or a memory that shouldn't exist, talking to my dead parents when they were young, trying to warn them about a future I couldn't change. "I'm fine," I lied. I know what it's like to lose something precious, to let it slip away without meaning to. And you two have something special. I can see it. Anyone could see it." Alina's expression softened. "That's very sweet of you to say." "It's true." The band was starting up again. Couples were returning to the floor. David looked at Alina. "Shall we?" "Actually," I said before I could stop myself, Could I have this dance with a leaner? I don't know why I asked. Maybe because I wanted one more moment with her. Maybe because I'd never danced with my mother, not once in my whole life, and some part of me needed to before I left this place, wherever this place was. David looked surprised but not upset. He glanced at Alina, who smiled. "I'd be delighted," she said. She placed her hand in mine, and I led her onto the floor. The band was playing something slow, romantic. I put my hand on her waist, feeling the slippery fabric of her dress, the warmth of her through it. She rested her other hand on my shoulder. We began to move. She was a better dancer than I was, but she made it easy. She followed my lead even when my lead was uncertain, adjusting to my rhythm, making my clumsy steps look intentional. "You're not a bad dancer yourself," she said. "You're just being kind." "Maybe a little," she smiled, "but you have a good heart, I can tell." "Can you?" "Yes, it's in the way you move, the way you hold yourself. You're carrying something heavy, aren't you?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Whatever it is you've lost, I can see it in your eyes, that look, like you're searching for something." "I am," I whispered. "I'm searching for this, for the way things were before they got complicated, before I ruined them." "You didn't ruin anything." "You don't know that. You don't know me." She pulled back slightly, looking up at me. Her eyes, my eyes, really, the same shape and color I saw in the mirror every morning, were kind. "Maybe not," she said, "but I know that look, the guilt, the regret. Whatever you think you did wrong, whatever you think you should have done differently, you have to forgive yourself. You have to let yourself be human." I was crying again, silently, but she could see it. "Thank you," I said, "for this, for dancing with me." "Thank you for asking." The song was ending. I could feel it, the way you feel things ending even when you're not ready. The music swelling toward its final notes, the world around us becoming less solid, less real. "I should go," I said. "Will we see you again?" I shook my head. "No, but that's okay. This was enough. This was more than enough." She smiled, sad but understanding. "Take care of yourself." "You too. Take care of each other." I stepped back from her. She returned to David, who'd been waiting at the edge of the floor. He put his arm around her, and they stood together watching me. I wanted to say something else, something profound or final, but there was nothing to say that wouldn't give away too much, that wouldn't change things in ways I couldn't predict. So I just raised my hand in farewell. They raised theirs back. And then the ballroom was fading, dissolving, becoming light and color, and then just light. And I was back in the kitchen, sitting at the table, the photograph in my hands. It was still again, just a picture. My parents frozen mid-dance, smiling at each other across 67 years. But something had changed. In me, not in the photograph. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff from sitting too long. The sun was setting outside, painting the kitchen in shades of orange and pink. I should leave soon. Should lock up the house and drive back to my own place, my own life, the routine that's been waiting for me to return to it. But first, I had something to do. I went through the house, room by room, until I found what I was looking for in the living room closet. My father's old record player, dusty and probably broken, but I plugged it in anyway. And beneath it, a milk crate full of records. Big band music, mostly. Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, Tommy Dorsey. I pulled one out at random, blew the dust off, and placed it on the turntable. The needle crackled when I set it down, but then the music started. Trumpet and saxophone, warm and rich, filling the empty house. I took the photograph and carried it to the mantel above the fireplace, where my mother used to keep family photos before she got sick and stopped caring about things like that. I set it in the center, propping it against the wall. Then I just stood there, listening to the music, watching their frozen dance. And something occurred to me that should have been obvious from the start. The photograph wasn't magic. The ballroom wasn't real. I hadn't traveled through time or slipped into some parallel dimension where the past was still happening. I'd imagined it, all of it. My grief-soaked brain, confronted with this image of my parents happy and young, had constructed an elaborate fantasy to help me process everything I'd never said, everything I'd never asked, everything I'd never known. But here's the thing about imagination, about the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of loss. They're real too, in their own way. The conversation I had with my mother, the dance we shared, the way my parents looked at each other in that ballroom, it all happened. Not in the literal physical sense, but in the sense that matters. Memory is a dance we do with the dead. We lead, they follow, or they lead and we follow. We move through the past, through all the moments we wish we could change or extend or experience differently, and we do change them. We do extend them. Not in reality, but in the space where memory and imagination blur together, where the dead are as alive as we need them to be. My parents aren't gone. Not really. They're here in this photograph, forever dancing, forever young, forever in love before life taught them all the reasons to stop being in love. And I'm here too, older than they were in this image, carrying all the weight of the years they haven't lived yet, all the knowledge of how their story ends. But maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what it means to be the one who survives, to carry the full weight of the story, the beautiful parts and the hard parts and everything in between, and to find a way to love it all. I turned away from the photograph. The record was still playing. On impulse, I started to dance. Alone in my father's living room, in a house full of ghosts and dust and memories, I danced. Badly, awkwardly, without any of the grace my parents had possessed in that ballroom. But I danced. Because they taught me how, in their way. Not through words or lessons, or the kind of deliberate instruction that gets passed down from parents to children. But through this photograph, this single frozen moment that contained everything they'd been before I knew them. They taught me that love is something you do, actively, intentionally. That it requires movement, effort, the willingness to keep stepping even when you don't know where your feet should go. That it's easy at first, when you're young and everything is new and shining. And that it gets harder as time goes on, as the music changes, as your body ages and the world presses in. But that you have to keep moving anyway. You have to keep dancing. The song ended. The needle lifted automatically, and the room fell silent. I turned off the record player, but I left the album out. Tomorrow, I'd come back and play it again. And the day after that. Until I'd listened to every record in that milk crate, until I'd filled this house with all the music my parents used to love. And then maybe I'd pack up the house for real. Sell it or rent it, or whatever you're supposed to do with inherited property. Move forward with my life in the way I'd been avoiding for 2 years. But tonight, I just picked up the photograph one more time. "Thank you," I whispered to the frozen couple, to my parents, to the memory of who they'd been and who they'd become and everything in between. They didn't answer, of course. They just kept dancing, kept smiling at each other across the decades, kept existing in that single perfect moment before everything got complicated. And that was enough. That was more than enough. I locked the door behind me when I left, but I took the photograph with me. It's sitting on my own mantle now, in my own house, where I can see it every day. A reminder that the dead don't leave us. We carry them. In our genes, in our habits, in the small unconscious ways we move through the world. And in our memories, where they're always young, always dancing, always exactly who we need them to be. Some dances never end. They just wait for us to remember the song.